We are truly honored to have a person with a distinguished history of public service and fighting the good fight for the people of Illinois delivering the keynote address today. Paula Wolff has passionately served the people of this state in various capacities. A leader in policy and planning, Wolff served in the administrations of Illinois Governors Thompson, Richard Ogilvie, and Jim Edgar. Paula has also been a leader in education, as first a visiting fellow at the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, where she helped establish a not-for-profit collaborative serving 4 pilot sites in the Chicago public schools. Paula Wolff later went on to serve as president of Governors State University from 1992 through 2000. Paula's breadth of influence in fighting for justice and opportunity in Illinois is exemplified on the many boards she sits on, including the Illinois State Toll Highway Authority and the City Colleges of Chicago, which she chairs, the Joyce Foundation, Aerial Investments, the Metropolitan Planning Council, and the University of Chicago's Board of Trustees. Wolff has focused her policy work in the areas of justice and violence, including examining the issues related to incarceration and rehabilitation. Her more recent work has included the Mayoral Policy Caucus on Prisoner Reentry, which led to the City of Chicago implementing ban-the-box hiring standards, the State of Illinois Community Safety and Reentry Commission, and the CLEAR Commission that modernized the Illinois Criminal Justice Code. Through her work that started Metropolis Strategies, the Collaborative on Reentry, and now the Illinois Justice Project, an organization implementing policy initiatives and programs to improve the justice system by addressing issues of criminal sentencing, violence, incarceration, and rehabilitation, Paula has invoked the conversations needed to continuously take the critical look to reform our criminal justice system. Wolff has a bachelor's degree from Smith College and a master's and PhD from the University of Chicago in political science. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Paula Wolff. Thank you.
That was very generous. I should just rest on my laurels and sit down. So it's a great honor to be here with Representative Flowers and the others who were here on the panel. I'm sorry I was unable to be here this morning. But this is a group which really represents the best and the brightest working on policy issues. You've been tenacious. Safer Foundation has been a fabulous catalyst and an anchor for the work, the policy work around reentry and recidivism, and I just can't tell you there's no group I would rather have an opportunity to speak before. However, there are 2 caveats. First of all, I speak very fast. I'm not going to die. I do breathe. I just want to warn you. Okay? And the second caveat is that I got a very formal letter with an assignment, which of course I'm not going to follow. I'll try. I'll tell you what the assignment was. The assignment was to discuss, in the context of reentry and recidivism, the work that the new organization that we've spun off, the Illinois Justice Project, is going to do. And the second is the role that we played in reentry and advocacy in the past. So first, let me say that the Illinois Justice Project has worked very hard, I hope, to be collaborative. And so anything that we talk about today, and in fact, some of the things in the introduction that were attributed to me, are really just a byproduct of the work of a lot of people, including a lot of the people in this room. And I think that's an important part of what the history and the story of the collaborative is, and the history and the story of the Justice Project as we go forward. But let me just quickly talk about the role we played in the past. And first, I want to single out Esther Franco-Payne, who's a member of the Justice Project. You all know that the Justice Project would be nothing without Esther. She is the leader and the founder of the Collaborative on Reentry, and has really done an extraordinary job of bringing together the stakeholders, all of us here, and a lot of government people, along with a set of principles which everybody has hammered out, and those principles are really driving what we should be doing in terms of reentry and recidivism, and how we should change the view of what's going on and how we do that. So, as it was mentioned, the collaborative was an outgrowth of work that was being done by Mayor Daley, whom we had persuaded should think about reentry because it was in the best interest and the self-interest of the city, and also Governor Blagojevich, who had set up a different group. The collaborative came out of trying to merge those groups and the recommendations that came out of each of them to try to figure out how to actually get things to happen. Let me give you, and that's still ongoing, and I will come back to that in a few minutes. But in terms of the history and the role we played, I just want to take one example. First of all, because I had an interesting coincidence the other day, and also because the SAFER Foundation and this group played such a big part of that. And that was, and Angela Rudolph, in fact, was working with me at the time that we did that. I didn't see Angela. Is she here today? Well, in absentia, she's fabulous too. So Angela worked on this, and this was something that SAFER ended up taking an enormous role in. That's the Certificate of Relief from Disabilities and the Certificate of Good Conduct. And there's a wonderful, I would recommend to you, 2006 report that SAFER put out that talks about the history of that and what worked, why it worked. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I think it represents the model of doing the kind of work that we want to do. And I'm being selfish here. I'm trying to engage everybody in thinking about how we move this forward. It's really not about the Justice Project. It's really about how all of us work together. So let me talk quickly about 6 steps that were part of the history of this, but I hope, and we can talk about how these should be modified. I'm not wedded, obviously, to these 6 steps, but I think there's 6 steps that spell out how really to do advocacy and policy change in a successful way, and it worked in this instance, I thought, extremely well. And I'll fold into there a little story, which always amuses me. So the first thing is doing the research and understanding the problem, and Diane Williams, who was then the head of the SAFER Foundation at the time, and I both joined the Illinois Workforce Board under Governor Blagojevich, and to be absolutely honest, they asked me to join, and I needed a fellow traveler to start thinking with me about how to get the Workforce Board, which is the vehicle through which all the federal money flowed into Illinois, to be able to do workforce training, to get some of that money to people who are formerly incarcerated and to work on the reentry problem. Open parenthesis, we were exceedingly unsuccessful at doing that. And it was really a pain in the neck going to those meetings and being as frustrated as we were. Close parenthesis. However, we did, Diane and I created a friendship and started to think about, well, if we can't get these people to spend the federal money this way, is there another way to address this project? So we did the research. We actually ended up getting the Workforce Investment Board to set up a group that was supposed to study this issue as part of their work. And I co-chaired that, and Diane, of course, was in the background pulling the strings. But then the second thing that we did using that was public education and reaching out and trying to co-opt as many people, I'm sure I shouldn't use that word, but co-opt as many people as we could in that process. And we used the task force to do that. And I got to the point where I was absolutely obsessed with the idea that the General Assembly, in part, in spite of the fact that there were many members there who were committed to doing the right thing, the General Assembly had gone down this path of punishment and punishment only, and they didn't want to consider rehabilitation, absolutely outside of what they were doing. This was 2002. So one of the goals here was simply, I don't know whether it was theater or just PR or something, but it was really an attempt to make the General Assembly and the governor's office think about the flip side of the coin. There really is such a thing as rehabilitation, and there is, after you've served your time, you should be able to get back into the economic mainstream and back into the community. And we had strayed so far from that, not only in Illinois, but throughout the country. We took this on as sort of a mission. So that was sort of the public education and the co-optation point. And we used some legislation to be able to do that. That's the third issue, is formulating the policy and turning it into legislation. And I, again, shouldn't confess this, but what we did is stole it from New York. New York had been working on this. We modified it, and I think we made it better in some ways, but we actually just stole the ideas of having some mechanism to, I don't know how to say it, even cleanse people so then they went back into society. They had a piece of paper that showed that they had been rehabilitated. And we figured, you know, it had worked in Illinois. The problem is they had no record of what they had done and how well that had worked. And so when we get to my sixth point is really, that was incorporated within the legislation. The fourth thing we did was worked with the legislature and others, and that's where this story comes in. So the sponsor in the Senate was then Senator Barack Obama. And we were having, and this was, by this time, at this point, it was Governor Ryan, who was the governor who was at the very end of his term. So we're having a terrible time getting the, have I got this? Yeah, it was Ryan, or maybe it was Ryan, or maybe it was just after Ryan. But we were having this terrible time dealing with the Department of Regulation, which is where these various prohibitions were. You couldn't work, if you had a record, you couldn't work as a barber, even though the only thing we train people to do in prison is to barber hair. You couldn't work as a gardener. I mean, there are 52, as you know from the work that the Safer Foundation did, 52 different professions that you couldn't be licensed to do. So one of the things that we had to do is work the Department of Regulation, basically what it was called. And we were having a terrible time with it. We could not get the general counsel to review this legislation, and they had the governor's office, because of this, had a brick on the bill, and we couldn't move it. So Senator Obama, and by the way, Will Burns, who's now the alderman from the 4th Ward, was Senator Obama's staff person at the time, and he was very diligently trying to get this through. So he suggested what we do is get the general counsel for the department on the phone with Senator Obama. So we're on the phone, it's like a 3-way call, I'm on the phone. This guy is giving the most unbelievable excuses about why he couldn't approve this bill. It's in violation of the United States Constitution, it's against due process, it was part of, I couldn't even figure out what he was talking about. So Senator Obama was very calm and he was very quiet, and he finally said, "Sir, I teach constitutional law at the University of Chicago. I'm not sure that you actually have the Constitution on your side, so let's just move on and we'll approve this bill." And I'm thinking, how does this lawyer in this department have the, whatever, backbone, let's say in a nice term, to stand up against this guy? So about 3 weeks later, the bill moves, and I discover the guy has actually moved out of the position he was in the counsel's office. And again, we're all in the cone of silence here, right? Yes. He turns out to be the son-in-law of Governor Ryan. Oh, so the bill passes and we go on. And then my little anecdote that triggered this was I was having a meeting with Judge Biebel, who supervises the criminal court, and he was bragging about how wonderful it was that there was this mechanism, the certificates of rehabilitation, that he was able to use in order to get people back into the community. So I'm thinking, well, here we are only 12 years later and we're actually getting some traction. So then the 5th thing that was really important was the implementation of this bill. Many people forget that when you pass a bill, it doesn't just self-execute, and I hate to think the number of pieces of legislation that are sitting on the books that nobody has ever funded and nobody has ever implemented. And this group and SAFER were absolutely adamant about following through, going out, meeting with the people who had to implement this bill, whether it was the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, whether it was the director of the department, and then if they weren't getting what they needed, going back to the legislature and saying, look, you passed this bill, and now it's not being implemented, so what are we going to do about that? And you'll be surprised how appropriations and giving money in the legislative process turns out to be a wonderful hammer, right? So if somebody, director of a department, comes up before you, if you're a legislator in the appropriations committee and you happen to know that they're not implementing something that they should be, you can ask them a question about that and say, oh, I see your budget has X in here. Now you're not implementing this bill that we passed, so why should we give you any more money? And the legislature was absolutely wonderful about that. But it was having the outside groups following the implementation and understanding what was happening that permitted the policymakers to be able to apply the pressure. And then finally, and the 6th thing in terms of this process is evaluation. And as I said, it was really important that this was built in the bill, and I think all of the bills and all of the policy work that we do, absolutely critical to have evaluation in it, because if you can't prove that something works or that it isn't working, you can't ask people to continue to support it. And particularly with reentry, where I think a lot of policymakers and decision makers come to this issue thinking there's no way this is going to be successful. You have to be able to go back to them and prove that it is successful, and you have to have a very rigorous evaluation process. Not $1 million worth, but enough that you can actually go and show them that what was done has been successful and achieved what it was supposed to do. So that's my history, which really isn't history, right? I didn't follow the assignment. It's got a little bit of history, but more it's I hope, a call to arms to think about those 6 steps in the process and how we apply them as we move forward together to address reentry and recidivism issues. So now in a roundabout way, I'm going to talk about what we're going to do next, I hope. And by us, I know the assignment was the Illinois Justice Project, but by us, I'm hoping that means we can get as many people to think about these things and maybe come together on them as possible. So I'm going to go a long way around on this. My mother's birthday was this weekend, so the family flew out to New York where she lives. And for any of you who've flown recently, it's quite a wonderful experience. The tire burned down, and so they get you on the plane and they tell you, well, we've got 7 minutes left before we make you go back to the terminal, but okay, we'll stay for the next 7 minutes, and then we're going to be an hour and a half delayed, but they tell you 20 minutes at a time because they know if they tell you it's an hour and a half, you're going to throw a fit. So every 20 minutes, they get on the speaker and they say, oh, and by the way, I'm so sorry, we're going to have another 20 minutes. So I was traveling with some of the rest of our family, and for any of you who travel with family, I'm sure you don't have this experience. Our family doesn't travel very well together. We approach this in little different ways. My husband just fumes and screams, and so it was rather a harrowing trip. So we finally got to New York, and about 1:30, I finally hit the bed, and I'm thinking, how am I ever going to go to sleep? I'm completely wound up, and I looked for the most boring book in the room that I was in. And I found it next to my bed. It was a history book about the South right after the Civil War and the impact of the Civil War on the culture of the South. So this is something that doesn't interest me at all. I typically don't read history. I figure 2 minutes I'm going to be out like a light. And I started reading it. I actually got through a couple of chapters. And this is a little bit analogous to what I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Michelle Alexander book, The New Jim Crow. There's also another one you might be interested in, which not as many people know about, called Slavery by Another Name, which is written by a guy named Doug Blackman in 2004, and it documents what happened right after the Civil War in terms of people who were arrested, basically going into servitude to large industries, particularly in the South, because they couldn't pay the fines to be able to go through the justice process. It's really, it's part of the trip of the Michelle Alexander thesis. So out of the 2 chapters that I read, I would like to just talk about 3 very, I thought, interesting and interrelated points. The first was the terrible impact that the Civil War had on the economy in the South, and the reason that the South was so adamant about winning the war. No surprise, I guess I should have known this, but the South was the most productive part of the United States economy. It was cotton was the source of the greatest exports in the United States, and what was the source of cotton? Slavery, right. So they had absolutely no interest, not only emotionally, but also economically, in getting rid of slavery. And the richest people in the South were the people who owned the slaves and had a culture around that. And that was sort of the second point, which was the culture of slavery, which I had thought I knew about, but the way this author described it and documented it historically was talking about, I mean, the thing that struck me about it, was the importance of the person who was the slave owner, and that he typically was like running a community. He was the jury, the judge, the master, the person who decided what families were going to stay together, who got beaten, how, and probably all of you know this. I just hadn't thought about it in terms of the parallel to the justice system, that there was one person who was actually quite removed from government, because government didn't consider slaves people, so they weren't part of the justice system, so that there were people making individual decisions on plantations without any regard to anything except their own values. And there was an anecdote about Frederick Law Olmsted, who was the guy who ended up designing Central Park and Jackson and Washington Park here, and Grant Park actually too, seeing a slave owner beating unmercifully, one of the women who worked on the plantation, and Olmsted saying, why did you have to do that? And he was saying, because if I don't exert my power and authority, everything will get out of control. And that was the way they thought about the culture of slavery in the South. And then the third, and I've already referenced this, is the fact that it really was outside of government, But he also makes the point in this book that it was an enormous part of government. He points out that 12 of the United States presidents were slave owners, so that's 1 out of 4, even today, are people who own slaves. And they came with this kind of culture and understanding of what government and the role of government was, or is, I guess. So, with that as the foundation, let's talk, I would like to talk about what the goals of the Justice Project are going forward and what we should be thinking about, and I hope what we can all engage in together. First of all, I think we recognize it is an untenable situation in the United States and certainly in Illinois, the way the justice system is working today, and that reentry and recidivism are an enormous piece of changing that untenable situation, since so many people are being processed through the system. Open parenthesis, my assignment was talk about reentry and recidivism. The whole system, from beginning to end, needs to be redone. Close parenthesis. But we're talking about reentry and recidivism here. So first and most importantly, I think we need to recognize and talk about and crystallize what we're really trying to do, and what are the principles that we're trying to reestablish or reincorporate, or perhaps cynics would say for the first time incorporate into what we're doing in the United States in terms of public safety and the justice system. And I can't help myself because I'm a political theorist. In terms of that theory of change, I would go back to the United States Constitution. And I would say there are a series of principles that conflict with one another in the Constitution. They're in there, we're not going to change them. But when you think about what's in the Constitution, there's the principle of equality. And then there's the question, is that pure equality or is that equality of opportunity? And then the second principle that's incorporated in there is public safety. When you read the Federalist Papers, the guys who justified the Constitution, they kept arguing the reason we need this big country and this big federation of states is because it's dangerous. We can't stand on our own, whether it was invasion from the French, invasion from the English, invasion from the Indians. They just said this was really about public safety, and that's an essential principle which carries obviously forward today in terms of the way the criminal justice systems operate. But third, and to me most interesting, is capitalism. There's absolutely no question that the principle of capitalism is incorporated in the Constitution. We don't learn about that in 7th grade, right? But when you think about the number of cases that are about what companies can do and, in fact, the whole question of slavery, because slaves were property. And the two big fights they had at the Constitutional Convention when they were writing the Constitution that almost blew the place apart were the question of, first of all, whether the slaves would ever be freed. And they said in the Constitution they would be freed by 1808. Talk about laws that were not implemented, right? And then the second was when they were counting up who was counted as people in order to determine how many congressional seats would be in every one of the states, they finally compromised that a slave counted as 3/5 of a person. Did the slaves vote? No. Only the white landowners voted, but the slaves were still counted. Can anybody tell me an analogous situation today about redistricting? Yes. Where do we count the people who are in prison? We count them in the district where the prison is. We don't count them in the community where they live. So this principle and this issue has not gone away, and that was part of this whole question of what it meant to try to balance these questions of public safety, capitalism, and equity within the Constitution. So I only have 20 minutes. I've already given my history lesson. I've given the history of the Justice Project. I'm trying to talk about what we need to do going forward. So let me just try to pull this all together. I think what we need to do is think about this in terms of the way that this historian who put me to sleep was thinking about the way the South dealt with the culture after the Civil War. So I would underscore that what we're trying to do is change the culture of the justice system in the United States and in Illinois, and the culture of reentry and recidivism. We have to be thinking completely differently about that system. And first, to go back to the 3 points that I extrapolated from the book, is the economic implications of this. It's not exactly like not having anybody to pick the cotton, but there are a lot of resources currently invested in the justice system the way that it is. There are a lot of jobs, there are a lot of contracts, there are a lot of things that happen around the justice system, whether it's from the local police force, through the prisons, through parole, and people coming back. And you cannot ignore the economics of that. The other element of economics is what we do to the people who leave the justice system and what their opportunity is in terms of economic equality. And I would argue that we haven't yet figured out how to address that as a community. I think the people in this room understand how to do it, but I don't think as a community and public policy makers we figured that out. And then the third element, I think, of economics, which is currently, I think, what Esther and I are most seriously committed to in the short term and are with other people in this room. I'm trying to do my assignment, talk about what we're doing, is this reallocation of resources back into the community. Because what we do know is the way the system works now isn't effectively addressing the issues we need to address. And we have to give resources into the community to divert people, to help people be successful not going into the justice system. And to the question of recidivism and reentry, we don't have the resources in the community to effectively help people do that. SAFER is a wonderful organization. You can only help so many people, and all of you out there who work on this know that we don't have the resources in the community to support that. We also have a system that is totally designed not to be successful in this. And the economics continue to perpetuate that. So you have a separate person who's your probation officer from the person who's your parole officer. The services you get when you're on probation may be provided by precisely the same organization that provides them to you when you're on parole, but nobody talks to one another. Files don't go from one place to another. So the way we're spending our money, assuming that we thought the system was functioning the way it should, is completely antithetical to having a result that really resolves any of these questions. So really thinking about how do we shift the resources, how do we talk about that? It's just, I don't want to have a civil war, but that seemed to be the only way they could get to the point of actually changing the economic configuration of what we were doing in this country. This is not as important an issue in some way as that, obviously. But in some ways, if you read Michelle Alexander, it is the obvious extension of that, and that's something that we have to address. The second thing that I took away from this book is the idea of the culture. And again, fast forward to today, what is the culture of the justice system now? And how do we think about that? Some of the most, we have to maintain and continue to support the idea of public safety. On the other hand, you look at people like Tracy Mears, who's a law professor at Yale, who talks about police legitimacy. And John Mackey and that John Howard Association recently put out a report where they interviewed 6 young men and a woman, one woman, who were in the justice system. And they asked them a series of questions. And what comes through so dramatically is absolutely no respect for law enforcement and fear of law enforcement. Talk about if you don't have a gun, you're going to get killed. You need to either be armed or you're going to get killed. And they don't see law enforcement as protection within the community. Again, I know this is no surprise for a lot of people in this room, but just to restate the culture that we're dealing with and how we can restore some kind of legitimacy to the criminal justice system. I don't want to blow the place up. I did once upon a time want to blow the place up. It's true. But I today believe that everybody in the justice system is doing what they're mandated by law to do. They're trying to do what they're supposed to do. They may be misguided, they may not do it the way I would do it, but the laws themselves are fundamentally wrong because everybody is assigned to do something that's counterproductive to something else. If you're the state's attorney, you think your job is to round up as many people as you can and put them in prison, and you get credit for that, and you get reelected for it. If you're a parole agent, your job is to catch people who don't come to their parole hearings, their parole meetings, or who violate a drug test, or who can't be simultaneously looking for a job, getting drug testing, going to some kind of substance abuse or anger management program, all the same time, the same day. So how can we ask people to do that? So we've got to figure out how we get the system to be rational and look at it from the perspective of not only the people who are in the system, but the families and the communities where those people come from. And that means a complete culture change, and maybe that's not the right term, but a really rethinking what are we trying to do with the justice system. And I don't want this to be a downer, so open parenthesis, I do think that this joint committee, that Representative Zaleski and Senator, no, Rowell's not the co-chair. Nolan, thank you. Our co-chairing really offers a chink in the armor, if you will, and again, I don't mean to be too negative, but they are actually thinking about what should we do to, it's called the Criminal Justice Reform Committee. What should we do to reform the committee? And this is a committee that started because there was a bill on mandatory minimums that got stopped. And when you talk to Representative Zaleski, he would say to you, I thought this was going to be a no-brainer. It was going to be a stronger bill about gun control, and those passed the General Assembly like that. Every year we increase the penalties, we add a new crime. Battery against a librarian is a crime in Illinois because we need to add a crime every year. But what he said is it wasn't a no-brainer, and he now knows that somehow he has to join this with some genuine reform within the system. So I view this as an enormous opportunity. If you haven't been to the committee hearings, go to the committee hearings, contact the people in the General Assembly who are on it and the people who are going to receive the bill that they're going to put together, because I hope what we can do is make a statement for the first time that the culture of the justice system has to change. And then finally, the third is rethinking the role of government. And I've sort of alluded to that, but again, I don't know how to say this. Say it. The people who are most harmed by this system, the people who live in the communities that are most harmed by this system, need to be the ones who help articulate what needs to happen in the system. Thank you. So those people and the people that they elect have to understand that we are all behind them, and we are going to help in any way that they tell us to make sure that our voices are heard as part of this process. So even if I learned this the hard way, even if you're working for the governor doesn't just wave a wand and say, this is gonna happen. Governor's a very powerful position, but you're dealing with a lot of forces beyond your control. And unless all of those forces are lined up together, you can't make change. And the only way those forces are going to be lined up together is if there's a shared cultural understanding of where we're trying to go. So here's my other pipe dream. And this is not something the Illinois Justice Project is going to do, but I keep saying we're going to because it's too hard. We've gotten through a whole bunch of processes in the United States that have given power to people who don't have power. We've given women the right to vote, we've given African Americans and former slaves the right to vote, we've given people who are new to this country a right to vote, we've given people who are under 21 a right to vote, people without property a right to vote. So we are capable of changing. It's sometimes long and it's sometimes hard, but part of that process is giving credibility to those people. So think about the women's movement or think about the gay rights movement. Until people were willing to stand up and say, I'm a woman and I deserve some power in this society, nothing happened. Until gay people said the same thing, nothing happened. So what can we do to help formerly incarcerated people who now have such a stigma that they can't stand up and say that because it hurts them and it hurts their families? What can we do to help them be able to stand up and say that? I'm formerly incarcerated. I've turned my life around, I've done this, I've done that. Or I'm a formerly incarcerated person, and every place I turn, there is an obstacle I cannot deal with. We shouldn't be ashamed. We shouldn't be ashamed to have done that, because what we have done as a society and a government to those people is the obstacle that they are trying to overcome. So what we have to do is have them willing to stand up and help support them to be willing to stand up so that things don't become worse when they do stand up. And that's, to my mind, that's no different from some of these other movements. It's more complicated because the force of government has been running the other way for so long, but we should be able to turn it around, and the people in this room can begin to do that. And we just have to work together and figure out how to do that. So let's, two last thoughts. The other thing that, as this movement and this group working on this begin to grow, what I found is, and this is why, again, in the cone of silence, I hated working with the human services people, because everybody had a different point of view and they were critical of everybody else. This movement has been a very united movement. People have been focused on the same thing. I fear we're getting to the point where we now have disparate points of view, and we begin to be critical of one another and the way that we approach things. And I hope what we can do is remember that the only way policy changes is if there are many voices coming from many different perspectives. There's the irrational junkyard dog that just keeps screaming, "This is terrible, blow the place up." And then there are the people like me who suck up to the power structure and try to figure out how you make the thing come together. But we shouldn't dismiss any of those voices or any of those methodologies, because the most important thing is to be unified around a set of principles, and then everybody's going to use a different way to get there and not be critical of one another. So I will end, and boy, they would shoot me at the University of Chicago. I will end with Saul Alinsky's point, which is, if the ends don't justify the means, what the hell does? Thank you.
Okay, can we give Paula another great round of applause? Really tremendous history lesson, teaching, policy 101, policy in action. The next panel that we're going to bring up is a true reflection of how organizing policy and advocacy at a community level can create great change and opportunity for people with criminal records. In your programs, which I didn't say earlier, all of our participants' bios are in the program. So any additional information that you need about the people who are participating in the panel is in our bios. Our next panel I'm going to introduce and have them come to the stage is Rachel Ramirez and Charles Austin from the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. Chris Patterson from One Northside. Professor Ray Prendergast from City College of Chicago, and our Vice President of Community Corrections, Jerry Butler. Can you please give them a great round of applause? Again, this panel has accomplished some outstanding deeds in the past year, creating opportunities in housing with the CHA reentry pilot, the great work of One Northside with the Jewel Osco Band the Box, and a tremendous landmark program that the collaboration with City Colleges of Chicago and the Safer Foundation to bring high-skilled machine operating into our community correction center. So I will hopefully work this computer correctly to get to our next slide. No, I didn't. Okay, I was going to show pictures of each of the projects, each of the campaigns, and hopefully I can get my assistant, Camille Freeman, if she can come in. We don't want to delay everybody and keep anybody longer, as we promised. But first, we're going to start off with Rachel Ramirez and Charles Austin from the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. And first, I would like for Rachel and Charles, for those who don't know, give us a brief history of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless and the work that you do.
Sure. The Chicago Coalition for the Homeless is a nonprofit in Chicago. We've been around since 1980. And for about 7 or 8 years now, the coalition has focused on reentry as one of our main issues. And some of the most recent research that our policy team did found that 49% of people who are utilizing the emergency shelter system in Chicago have a reentry barrier. So that's a direct link between reentry barriers and the ability for people to get housed in housing. And so our organization is an advocacy and organizing organization. We don't do direct services, although we have legal services for homeless students.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. And in the background, you have a picture here of the press conference when Mayor Rahm Emanuel announced the CHA pilot program at St. Leonard's. Second question for Chicago Coalition of the Homeless. Describe your journey and the challenges that you face finalizing this CHA pilot.
Where do I begin? Well, actually, it's been a long journey. As Rachel said, for about 8 years we've been working on this. The last 2 years, an intense meeting with CHA. Unfortunately, even with the mayor's support, we're still getting pushback from CHA on some issues. In order for this to be a meaningful pilot, as the mayor wants, we need more assistance from advocates like you, and to continue to do our work in pushing. Several offenses, murder, things of that nature, everything they want totally off the board. But we're looking at not banning anything, but looking at each individual case by case, how it should be. That's true reform. That'll provide people like myself with backgrounds an opportunity to move our lives forward.
You okay? Okay, thanks. In developing the pilot for Chicago, what were some other cities or housing authorities that had programs that helped you guys build a model that you laid out in front of CHA?
Well, we looked at Burlington, Vermont.
I don't think that mic is working there.
Yeah, I'll try yours, Richard.
There you go.
Burlington, Vermont was one of the places. Los Angeles County Housing Authority, New York City, those were the major ones that we looked at and researched and kind of structured our pilot afterward.
And this was part of the message that we brought to initially the former CEO of CHA, Charles Woodyard, telling him this is a directive that came down from HUD, from former Secretary Sean Donovan, that he wants public housing authorities to look at ways to house people with records. And there's several cities doing this already, and Chicago can be on the front of that wave. And this was the message that we continued to bring to the mayor once Charles Woodyard resigned from CHA. So we really wanted the mayor and the CHA to look at this as an opportunity to be on the front end of cultural changes and a political climate that's changing in favor of reentry reform in this country.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. As being part of those meetings with CHA and Housing Authority of Cook County, which you guys, I really applaud you for running 2 simultaneous pilots as far as being able to provide opportunities in the city of Chicago and also in suburban Cook County with housing programs. Now, fully implemented, what will the programs look like and what opportunities will they provide people with records in subsidized housing?
So we look at this pilot as just beginning to open the door for people who have turned their lives around to be able to access stable and affordable housing. And so what it's going to look like is a pilot program in Chicago that houses 50 people over 2 years. And the people are coming from programs. You all have this one-pager here that we made for you, which explains how this works, but people are coming from one of 3 programs in Chicago. We have Safer Foundation, and Tony, as he said, has been helping us advocate, and now the Safer Foundation team is going to help select people to be part of the pilot. So Safer Foundation, Lutheran Social Services of Illinois, and St. Leonard's Ministries will be recommending people who they have worked with for at least a year who they can say, this is somebody who's turned their life around. This is somebody who would be an excellent tenant of CHA. And people who are CHA reentry pilot participants will be able to move in to Section 8 and public housing on one of two tracks. So the first one is unprecedented in CHA because CHA actually doesn't allow adults to move in with their adult family members, right? This pilot is going to allow people to return home to family that wants to house them. So somebody coming home from prison or after a felony conviction, for them to be able, after being vetted with a service provider, to move back in with family that's going to be a good environment, a good support system for them. It's currently not something that's allowed. And then the other way is that, the other way someone can be housed under the pilot is by coming off the wait list. So we know that there are people who are on the CHA wait list who have criminal backgrounds. There's not that many because the word out there is that if you have a record, you cannot live in CHA. But this is not true. So, and now the wait list is opening again, October 27th. So we want to get all our people on the wait list so that they could potentially become part of this pilot or just get in by themselves to public housing. But there's a 5-year wait period that CHA has for people with records. So your record and any criminal activity has to be completely clean for 5 years. But under the pilot, if somebody is on the wait list and they've only been out of prison or off parole for, say, 2 years, because they're part of the pilot, they would be able to move in. They wouldn't have to wait that whole 5 years. So it removes that waiting period.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. And again, as being part of those meetings, I know we gained momentum, and it was a very arduous task as far as trying to convince CHA. Most of our people, when they come home, are released into poverty, and they financially qualify for federally subsidized housing. Having come to SAFER as a housing director in 2005 and doing research on the autonomy that housing authorities have to impose their rules. When Secretary Donovan came out in 2011 with the letter, and subsequently Attorney General Holder came out with a letter for governors, and that provided us with the opportunity to educate CHA. I think during this 7-year process, there have been 4 administration changes that you guys had to fight. So when you go through the administration change, then the fight starts again. So last question for you guys right now is, what new campaigns do you have on your radar? Because I know you're not tired.
Not tired.
Yes, in actuality, you have some another handouts. I noticed we've been working on our Juvenile Justice Advisory Commission, and there are 2 pieces of legislation, HB 4432 and 4471, regarding the Illinois School Code and the Illinois Park Code, and we're working on that legislation, as well as 4580, the healthcare worker background check with representative Liddy. So we're working on those things as well.
And I would really like to interject at this point, and part of that big community-based campaign was coordinated by Ms. Laura Dean Frederick from Community Renewal Society. Laura, could you please raise your hand, stand up so we can recognize you? Really fight strong, fighting the tough fight, Springfield, minimum wage, housing, education, lifetime barriers, and having the community advocates as far as that teaching and that understanding that needs to happen on the community level, as Paula had just said, so the people and the faces that are most impacted by these policies have a voice. Next, I'm going to shift to Mr. Chris Patterson from One Northside. And again, when we engage, when we get involved, things can change. Our people are fighting, in most cases are voiceless, in most cases are faceless. That's why it was very important for EULA to be seen. As far as how blatant the discrimination is that here's a person 15 years removed from any criminal activity, master's degree, had to come to SAFER to get a job. And I think that's the picture and the framing that we have to see as far as the inequity that our people face. Chris, couple questions for you, buddy. Give us a brief history of the work at One Northside.
Sure. Hey, how's everyone doing today? So One Northside is a community organizing group located on the north side of Chicago. We work around violence prevention, mental health justice, education, tax transparency, the conglomerate of, I think, the foundation of social justice ills that plague our community. So the work that we have been involved in most recently was Ban the Box, or House Bill 5701. So what we decided to do on August 23rd last year was get involved with other organizations who had already done the work. We looked at across the country some of the things that were some of the root causes of why violence was happening. So I am the violence prevention organizer for One Northside. And in order to address really, as opposed to just saying, hey, put the gun down, or blaming the individual all the time, we decided to, as an organizing tool, address the root cause of violence. And we looked at jobs, housing, and education, and then voted ultimately on addressing a jobs campaign. Ban the Box has already something that already had some momentum in Illinois. The Governor Quinn had already done an administrative order. I know SAFER was working on that portion. And so we decided to help out and lend our hand with the legislation part.
Okay. Now, for your Ban the Box campaign, why was Jewel Osco the target?
Yeah, so what we were hearing from a lot of our elected officials when we were speaking with them was, what are the corporations saying about this? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the corporations would be most impacted. What we decided to do was we decided to identify a corporation that was based in Illinois. In the event, as a community organizing group, we needed to go visit them. It would be a little bit easier. So we looked at, Caterpillar, we looked at Jewel Osco, we looked at a couple other corporations, and just decided at the end of the day to choose Jewel Osco because they were the largest employer in a lot of communities of color that were plagued by violence. So it just made sense strategically for us.
Okay. How did you develop the community consensus to support the campaign?
Right, that was very, it was definitely an awesome trip to go down that way. So as Dr. Wolff stated eloquently just a second ago, I thought it was very important. I'm formerly incarcerated myself. And what I did and what we did at One Northside was gathered an extremely large group of returning citizens who were most affected by the issue. What we didn't want to do was create a grassroots movement that spoke around the individuals or spoke for but with. So we created I know there had to have been at least a couple dozen men and women who were formerly incarcerated in addition to community members. So we met on August 23rd. We had already done a house meeting or listening campaign where we spoke to over 11 organizations that were part of One Northside which included over 300 people. We asked strategic questions like, what are some of the root causes of violence? What are people saying about violence? And ultimately what we came up was the jobs campaign.
Okay. Now, in the beginning of your communication, did Jewel Osco embrace this campaign?
So, there wasn't ultimately any pushback, but there was something strategic in the air. And another thing, the reason why we pushed and picked Jewel Osco, because the Dominic's closings. Looking at the analysis of our campaign, we decided that Jewel Osco would be vulnerable to it. They were rebranding themselves at the time. They were buying up a lot of the old Dominics. They were, there's a lot of commercials out at that time about, them being a good community partner and such. And we sent a letter reminding them that we believed they were a good community partner. It would be a better partner if they joined us with this campaign. So ultimately, on February 12th, so a couple correspondence later, they had gone through a transition through their president. There was a couple presidents who kind of went through the Jewel Osco executive position, and then they came to our office in One Northside, located in Uptown Chicago, and announced to us that they were indeed taking off the felony question from their job applications.
Okay. And I think you guys have a copy of the letter. This has the One Northside logo, and that's the letter from Jewel Osco, which they're stating that they are removing the question of felony conviction off of applications for employment at their stores. What has happened since the announcement, Chris? Are Jewel actually hiring people with records?
So Jewel wasn't a bad partner on this. I don't know why I keep going back, but there was many, Jewel Osco was already hiring returning citizens, but we didn't feel there was any intention. And what we wanted to do by this campaign was set a mark for intention about our campaign. And so we do know that there are some returning citizens who are being hired by Jewel, and they have removed the question from their online applications.
Okay, thanks. Again, same question I had for Coalition. What new campaigns are on your radar?
Sure. So Ban the Box, while it being good and it's affecting thousands of men and women across the state, is not finished work. I think a lot of us understand that. There's a lot of discrimination in the workplace. We actually have decided and voted on recently 2 campaigns. The first campaign is we're going to move the city, the state, and the county to target returning citizens they hire each year for each government agency. And I know that some hiring does happen in both the city, county, and the state, but like with the Jewel campaign, I don't think there's any intention, like, okay, well, this year we'll hire. So we're working through the logistics of how that campaign will look. Our second campaign will move the Illinois Department of Corrections to mandate GED education as a condition of release. Right now, if you do not have a GED and you are in the Illinois Department of Correction, you have to enroll, but there is no accountability on the Department of Corrections to make sure that that happens. And so what ultimately happens is young men and women are coming back out into the streets no better off than when they went in the first place. And to a degree, it's a sabotaging that we're seeing on a daily basis on the news, whether we're seeing it in our neighborhoods. So, those are some of the things that we're currently working on.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Next, we're going to shift to our next team of panelists, and that's Professor Ray Prendergast from City College of Chicago and Jerry Butler from the Safer Foundation. We're going to get a good backdrop picture here.
Me? You start. Me? Me start? Okay, I'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. It's been really refreshing to hear the dialogue and the discussion today on some of the needs of people returning to the community from our correctional facilities in the state. Just to put this computer numerical control training program that SAFER is operating in its proper context, we're operating this program for individuals who are residing in what are known as our adult transition centers. Now, by a show of hands, who does not know what a SAFER Foundation Adult Transition Center is? Don't be embarrassed. Raise your hand if you don't know. All right. Adult transition centers, we have 2 of them that we operate in the North Lawndale community. They're residential programs for men who are serving out the remainder of their prison sentence in the community. So these are men who are still technically incarcerated by the Illinois Department of Corrections, and they have up to 2 years to serve before they would go on parole. So we have a captive audience. At our Crossroads facility, we have 380 men. At our North Lawndale facility, we have 200. So on any given day, we have obviously over 580 men doing that last portion of their sentence in the community. They're working, they're going to school, they're going on passes, they're doing community service. They're afforded a whole lot of, a large menu of services. But the one program that I'm to talk about today, and I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to talk about, is the computer numerical control training. I heard one of the elected officials, and I'm not sure which one, say 2 words, employable, and what was the second one? Who was listening? Employed. Employable, making individuals employable, and getting them employment. This program, the CNC training program, is doing just that. It's a partnership with 4 other organizations. The training component of the organization is the individual to my right, and I'll let him explain the mechanical portion of the training and the manufacturing training that Daly College does. There's another partner known as Manufacturing Works that has a lot of expertise in the selection of people who have potential to be successful in this computer numerical control training. Another partner is the organization known as NIMS. I think you have a lot of this information in your handout, so I'm going to skip through it pretty quickly. They are the national organization that issues industry-recognized credentials in being computer numerical control operators. And the last is the Center of Labor and Community Outreach. I believe they've changed their name now to Manufacturing Renaissance, I believe. They were involved with coordinating this program from the early days. So what does it mean? What does all this mean? It means that we have, up to this point, have had 2 cohorts of individuals from those centers. The first cohort was 17 individuals enrolled in the class. I have to admit, in the first couple weeks, there was a couple guys who didn't want to go along with the program, and so we had to kind of remove them from the program, but they were quickly replaced. Of those 17 all completed the training provided by Daly, which Mr. Pendergrass can discuss. And of that 17, 13 of them had jobs waiting for them when they were released. Now, what kind of jobs? These are operating computers. The field of manufacturing, I hope I'm not getting into your area, but the field of manufacturing has grown considerably from the time that, from my time, I'll just leave it at that. Everything as cell phones and everything else is high tech. There's computers that cut parts and do all the different fancy things, and it's a very intense training that these individuals have been afforded, and the success rate that they've obtained after completing that training, getting the credentials, becoming employed, and the key is remaining employed. All of those gentlemen, that first group, have been employed for 6 months or more, and I believe every one of them started around $13.50 an hour. So, is that making them employable? Yes. Were they able to get employed? The answer to that question is yes as well. The second cohort, again, we had 17 enrolled. 17 completed, and on that final day, which was only about a month and a half ago, I believe the number was 8 on your handout, but that number's up to around 13 now. All employed, working at various manufacturing plants around the city of Chicago, and quite honestly, 2 up in the Rockford, and I forgot the community right next door to Rockford, Belvedere, I believe it is, working up there. Again, going into those areas, commanding that level of salary because they had their credential. And I have to admit, I think Ray or some of the other folks in the field of manufacturing, my primary concern was, I know you can train people. I mean, that's what you do. So I know you can do that, and that's good. But the real challenge is going to be the employment part. And I was told by Ray and others that with people that have credentials, that trumps their record. And I've been in this game for a long time. You know, I mean, over 45 years have I been involved with working with adults and juveniles in the criminal justice system. So, you know, you got to show me a credential trumps a record. Somebody can walk in with a credential, and in all due respect, a good old boys work environment known as manufacturing. I mean, it's like penetrating the carpenters union, the plumbers union, the painters union. I just didn't believe it. But I knew we were going to put our best foot forward and cooperate with our other partners, and we have had some great results. We've had a great partnership with Daly College, and I think I'm probably talking too long because I get to going on this.
No,
you got to shut me up.
You've done a tremendous job, Jerry. You've answered
thank you.
most of my questions.
Well, good.
I think you must have saw my notes. But I'm going to shift to Ray because Ray, as far as a couple things I wanted to ask you. First of all, tell us about the College to Careers program at City Colleges. Again, there are brochures on the table that describes the program what City Colleges is doing in manufacturing.
So College to Careers is actually a system-wide program, and each college has a specialty. Daly College is the Center of Excellence for Advanced Manufacturing. Our curriculum includes an associate's degree and 6 certificates, and the SAFER program, the SAFER NIMS Foundation program is part of the CNC machining program, and the first 2 cohorts we ran the courses under continuing education, but this time we're running them as college credit. And our reasoning for this is one, we are a college and we really like college credit. We like giving out college credit. Second thing is college credit has more of a cachet in the labor market. It isn't necessarily the case with manufacturers that they care whether a course you studied was for credit or not. They really do care more about the skills. And the industry credentials validate those skills. So in the SAFER program, almost every completer has earned at least 3 industry credentials from NIMS. They cover the operation of these computerized machine tools, they cover materials and safety, and a basic understanding of manufacturing. And why this works, why the credentials trump a criminal background, is because there's a skills gap. And the skills gap creates opportunities for people. But I do want to put a caveat here. The catch is you have to have the skills. So the fact is that employers are hungry for employees, and we have a lot of jobs in manufacturing that are unfilled. But the fact is that to fill those jobs, you have to have certain skills. And these skills are becoming more advanced over time. So when I got started, all I had to do was pass a simple math test and show that I could convert decimals to fractions and read a ruler. And that was really enough to get started. And they would train you on a lot on the job. Well, today you're running these machine tools behind us. Those are in our shop at 28th and Western. Those are all driven by a computer. You have to understand how metal is cut. You need to know all the machining skills that machinists have traditionally known. But on top of that, you have to understand computer coding, what we call G-code. It's not terribly complicated. It's basically Cartesian coordinates, X, Y, Z. You know, if you remember your freshman high school algebra, how horrible that was having to graph equations. That's what it's like. As long as with some geometry, and if you get into what we call multi-axis machining, we start to add a lot of trigonometry. As time goes on, a lot of the operator positions that we're filling now, and I don't mean this to be bad news, but a lot of them are going to be eliminated by robots because we have robotic transfer between machines. That does eliminate some of the simpler operator jobs, but it also creates a more complex operator job where you now have to interface with a robot, which, by the way, runs a computer language almost identical to the one that's running the CNC machine. But it means that you have to keep upskilling as you go through it. Now, this crisis in manufacturing does create an opportunity for people with criminal backgrounds. And the policies in manufacturing companies are widely varied. I can't say that there is a uniform policy. I can say that defense contractors are hard to penetrate, but the automotive supply chain, which is very large, is not so difficult. And most companies that we place people in are family-owned and fairly small, and they make their policies as they go along. When you deal with a larger corporate entity, then it becomes more a need for a systems change or a policy change, and sometimes it's more difficult to work with. But in Chicago, we have a lot of companies that will hire people based on their skills. And the way I look at it is the hiring game is a lot like fundraising. If you can reduce the risk, you'll convince the funder to invest in your project. So whatever we can do to increase the confidence of the employer that they're not taking a risk on our trainees, the better off we are. So right now, I like this partnership and the way it works, and I know that Safer Foundation provides a lot of strong support, especially in those areas of employability skills, which in some ways are more important than the technical skills that we give them. But with that combination of soft skills and technical skills, we're confident that we can keep placing people in manufacturing jobs, and hopefully we'll also encourage them to keep upskilling themselves as they move through their career.
Well, next question for you, Ray. Two-part. Why and when was the partnership developed with Safer Foundation? And was there a history of city colleges working with our population?
I can say that for my department, I've been at Daly College since 2010. I've always had students that had criminal backgrounds. In fact, I did have a student who was at the ATC, and he was released to attend school at Daly College. And as far as the whole system, I'm actually not sure. But this partnership has been running, what, 2 years? Yeah, so it's 2 years old.
Okay. Next question for you, Jerry. How did we identify candidates for the program? I think there's some math or reading level.
Yeah, that's where Ray and also one of our other partners, Manufacturing Works, came into play because they have the expertise. They know what the prerequisites need to be. So they pretty much identified that for us. We know the client. We know the ones who have demonstrated some responsibility and exercised good judgment. So the interviews were done, some scoring methodologies were created, some math exams were administered, interviews conducted. So between a combination of Manufacturing Works and our staff at the ATCs, they selected those individuals.
And I think both of you guys can jump in on this as far as from the SAFER perspective and the City College's perspective. Would you say that this partnership has been a success?
Yeah.
Oh, I think so, wouldn't you, Ray? Yeah,
I'd say it's an unqualified success.
Yeah, again, back to those two words, employability and employed. And if that's a yardstick to measure something off of, I'd say we've done extremely well in those areas for those individuals. And we want to expand this. We've had some opportunities recently from other funding streams to continue and expand vocational training for individuals in adult transition centers. So this maybe is something that's on the horizon that's going to continue to grow and expand. But I've seen many people leave a facility with nothing but their bag over their shoulder and talking about it being a great day, you know, that they got released, and shortly after that it became a nightmare because they didn't have a job, they weren't employed, they didn't have the necessary supports. When these individuals with these credentials are leaving either one of those two adult transition centers, they're employable, and hopefully they're actually employed, so that's a good thing.
Okay. Well, I think this is an open question for any of our panelists as far as what you feel the type of support you need to push forward in your mission to provide opportunities for people with records. We can start with Ms. Ramirez.
Well, we're community organizers, so we want everyone to be involved in this. And I think what we've been hearing throughout this conference is that it takes different kinds of expertises that all of us have in this room. That's the model we have on our reentry committee, is first and foremost people with criminal records who have been homeless or are homeless, but also people who have legal degrees, and bring the attorneys on our committee and the professors and the service providers. Our pilot has 126 endorsing organizations, which is on the back of this sheet, and we always welcome more endorsing organizations. If you don't see yourselves on there, let us know. We would love to have 199 endorsers. So.
Okay, thanks. Charles?
And I just echo what Rachel said. We need more people to be involved so that we can continue to push the mayor to give us a meaningful pilot to truly impact people's lives.
Okay, Chris?
I think one of the most important parts is also the competition level. And I understand for name recognition, for building your organization, it's imperative for you to stay on the front end. But I think collaborating with other organizations and not necessarily so concerned about who's on the front end of the campaign, but making sure that the job gets done. And also, including some of the men and women who I think like society has written off and thrown over their shoulder as the castaways, including returning citizens in the fight, letting them have a voice. I don't know if I can go on. I can go on and on about that part right there, but that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Professor, for more expanded CNC opportunities.
So actually, I think our experience with the SAFER Foundation has had a big impact on the way Daly College approaches program development. We are currently we are currently creating short certificates in a number of career areas. So this is beyond just what we're doing in manufacturing, but personally manufacturing is my field. So we're working on a short certificate in welding, something that can get people employable in 16 weeks. We want it to be stackable. And a couple of years ago, we did create a set of stackable credentials for the manufacturing program, and they're great. We love them, but we're also looking to get something that the first credential would even be shorter than our basic certificate and would be able to get people employed in one concentrated semester. This is something that I think the colleges have thought about, but I think the partnership with SAFER has kind of pushed us into it. So when I say we're pursuing it, I mean we're actually submitting it to ICCB this month. So the partnership, I think, has had long-term a profound effect on the way we look at job training and incorporating short-term training with the long-term goals.
The CNC program has catapulted us into another arena, and quite honestly, as a result of some of the success we've been contacted by a number of service providers, training providers, not to be in competition with City College, but we're moving into additional lines of training. And I think because of the results we have with the CNC program, it's afforded us the opportunity to do this. We're going into the area of welding, CDLs, food service administration, culinary arts, Microsoft training. I know I'm skipping something, missing something. Someone help me. Ethel? Forklift, yes. Did I say CDL? Yes. So these are all different area of employment opportunities that appear to be welcoming to our clients if they have the industry recognized credentials to go along with that training. So we're really excited about this, and the relationship and the program with Daly College has really catapulted us into providing that kind of vocational training for those individuals in those adult transition centers.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. What we're going to do now, if you have a question, short question for our panelists, please, there are 2 microphones on each side of the room.
No questions, no questions.
I hope I don't have to recruit a person to play the Sandman role. So we can ask this panel our questions and we can start. And also going around, before you leave, the neon green sheet that's being put on the table is the conference evaluation. Please fill that out so that we can get an idea of the effectiveness of what we're trying to do. I think a big thing that Chris talked about, and I always echo, is that as far as being one of the largest and oldest organizations, we get the name recognition, but I've tried to model myself as being a person who's been available for everyone, to be a good partner. We don't have to be the lead. We just have to be involved because the fight is bigger than one organization or one individual. The young lady on my left. Could you say your name and who you're with?
They did several years ago.
I don't think your mic is working. I can't. Here, we'll let our IT guy.
Years ago, there was a relationship between Safer and...
No, still out. Wait a minute. He's going to hit you from the board. We got you. Don't worry.
The outfit that was...
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jada G. Haskins. I'm with Chicago Public Schools Juvenile Justice Reengagement Team. I work through the Office of Education Options and also Project Safe Neighborhood Funding. So my question is, in working with young people, post-adjudication, I know this is about adult reentry, but I know that Safer Foundation has an amazing youth-based program in terms of GED, acquiring their GED. So wondering if there was going to be a connection with this workforce training with the City Colleges of Chicago for the young men and women who are getting the GED training, because they are also experiencing re-entry back and being incarcerated. And employment is a huge issue with our young people. The first thing they always mention before education, because they don't see how that's aligned with their future, is I need to be employed. Though they're 15, 16, 17, they have children, they are dealing with homeless issues, and I just wanted to see what the connection might be.
Yes, our youth programs, our youth educational programs do have a component built in to assist them and support them in education. But also the Safer Foundation is embarking on a new initiative, and it's called Demand Skills Training, to where some of the coursework and things that I was talking about, hopefully as we grow in our demand skill training, it will also reach out to those 15, 16, well, maybe 17, 18-year-olds. Yeah, not the 15, 14, 15s.
No.
Right. So yes, I think the answer is yes. We haven't got there yet,
Okay.
Other than what we're currently doing, and you seem to be familiar with what we're currently doing. But we do plan to expand that in terms of vocational training and demand skills areas, and hopefully we'll be touching some of those young adults as well.
Okay.
If I may, this might be another area of collaboration between city colleges and Safer Foundation. We're overhauling adult education in city colleges, and we're combining job skills training with GED. So students will be dual enrolled in both adult ed and in career programs like manufacturing. And in fact, we intend to launch this very soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for your question. Ms. Jackson?
Once again, I'm Openda. Even though I'm not working in the field anymore, I still help people. And I just wanted to know, ask Ray or Jerry about the CNC. I think I heard you say you had men in this program, and I just want to know, in the future, will you be adding females?
Well, our funding, you know, a lot of times with funding, and I'm sure a lot of people know, there's stipulations on how you can spend it and who can receive the benefits of it. The funding stream that we've received up to this point has been limited to only our adult transition centers, and they're only at this point, and hopefully they never change, are all male. I would not want a co-ed adult transition center. So right now, that's one of the stipulations. The funding was for our 2 programs. So we're limited to the population that's there. But again, as we expand, hopefully, into this demand-skilled arena, we'll be broadening the scope and touching on people who aren't in those adult transition centers, which hopefully will include females.
And I want to point out that Daly College has a focus on recruiting women into the manufacturing program, and I actually brought some brochures with me on the table right next to you. But we had a speaker from JMC Steel. She's an executive from Pittsburgh, and she flew into Chicago just to speak to our students. And we're planning different activities and ways to engage women, especially young women of high school age, that manufacturing is not just a viable career option, but a great opportunity for them.
Okay, next.
Hi, my name is Nate Engel-Steinfeld. I'm with the Sentencing Policy Advisory Council, SPAC. And my question is just for the whole panel, what are we doing to evaluate how these programs reduce recidivism, and so that we can translate those recidivism reductions to our legislators, to our constituents? Thank you.
Well, I really appreciated what Paula Wolff had to say on that especially when you're trying to change the culture around looking at how we serve people with criminal records, you really have to show that it's working, right? So I can only speak for the reentry pilot, but we've built in a evaluation component that we're working on that's going to really look at how are people benefiting, what's helpful about the program, and what are the outcomes of it. And it's only 50 people today, but we hope by showing that this works to house people, gives them a foothold that they need to continue to be successful, that we could expand it. But the evaluation component is critical for us to do that. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that question. I think it was that's good. That's a good question. But we're not actually, with the campaign, we're not actually running a program, but we have been able to look at some numbers for the individuals who are incarcerated for violent crimes, as this being a violence prevention initiative. Over 90% of the individuals who are committed or are convicted for acts of violence, 70% of them don't have high school education. 40% of that 70 don't even have a 6th grade education. We know that through a Maryland study that there was a reduction of 40% with education introduced to incarceration. So what we're hoping to prove with our campaign is that if we mandate the GED, if they come out, if individuals are coming out of incarceration with the basic tool that they will need in order to get into trade, they would need in order to get employment, that the recidivism would then drop and then violence would then drop. So those would be the numbers in which we would follow.
And I'll jump in here as far as just, just to highlight the need that you're talking about. A former colleague of ours, Jodina Hicks, always talked about the seamless transition from incarceration to community. And SAFER, I think, moved ahead of the game with outcome-based programming and determining outcomes, especially for our population. That's why I always like to thank the legislators as far as fighting the fight and the great work that Kathy and you guys are doing at SPAC to highlight the statistical need. But then that combination of the human story, as Eula, and the stats to show that it's working, that's what we did with certificates of rehabilitation. When it was first introduced by Senator Obama, we went back and revised that legislation 3 times to where now it is a tool to benefit people like Eula, who can document rehabilitation, get jobs, living wage jobs, at industries that formerly would not provide us the opportunity. Right. Okay. Next question, George.
My name is George Salter. I'm with Westside Health Authority, CSAC Community Support Advisory Council. I serve as the Westside Coordinator. First of all, I want to just thank you all for what you're doing to help in reducing recidivism. And just following up on your point, to make the transition seamless from institution to back to community. This is for the whole panel. There's men that we see visiting in Sheridan Correctional Facility who have family members who are on the waiting list for homelessness to come into your program. Also, they're getting GEDs while they're there, and they're also partaking in the types of training that you offer. What can I go back and tell them in terms of how they can go from corrections into your programs, and what's the waiting time if they're already marching and doing those types of things while they're in corrections?
Well, and actually with our program, at this time, there's not a component to go directly from incarceration into housing unit with a family member. You would have to come through one of the three providers, which be Lutheran, Salinist Ministry, or SAFER. That's the only track available at this time.
And I think to piggyback on that, George, and as far as I go into many of the prisons with you throughout the state, and what we're trying to do is to get legislators to understand that rehabilitation is not a made-up word, both federally and statewide. There's a phrase that I coined when I first came here in '05 to do our housing project, and I share it with people when I go into the institutions, that fresh air causes amnesia. So what we're really trying to do is get our people to understand and focus on the rehabilitation necessary. Because in any one of these programs, and I was glad to be on board with Rachel and them to get them to understand, having been a former CHA employee, being a Section 8 landlord, to get them to understand how the bureaucracy works. Representative Flowers, Representative Kelly, Cassidy, and all of the people who are fighting for us, our fight is really a thankless fight in Springfield. There are 102 counties in the state of Illinois, and the person who's usually elected for statewide office is the prosecutor. So tough on crime reigns supreme, not only in the state of Illinois, but in this country. So what we try and do through the programs is identify candidates who've shown an exemplary record of accomplishment. Because I don't like to put the pioneer tag on them, but what we like to do is to get that door and keep it open. And so by bringing people out, making sure that we're working with CSACs, getting those people, guiding them into additional supporting program, then they can show up, they're ready to roll, and they can get past the avenues that in the community in which most of our people come back in, because it's not like there is a lot of community support in Austin or in North Lawndale. That internal support is critical to success. Anybody else? Okay. Young lady here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and first of all, thank everyone for the information. My name is Yvette Van. I'm a 17-year drug counselor, currently with HRDI, Men's Residential. And I would like to know, what could I do to help them? Most of them are court-ordered through task or probation. You motivate them, you help them identify drug issues. They leave treatment with some of the issues. They say probation can't do this or parole can't help with that. They're indigent, they need housing and training. So what can I do to start a network or a format so that they continue to stay clean and become productive citizens?
Well, I can address that on behalf of One Northside and what we're doing with our violence prevention work. Is we've set up, and while we're growing it, a small mentoring program from returning citizen to returning citizen. So something that's a little bit different through a volunteer workforce that we're using, about 10 men who have committed themselves to being mentors. So maybe afterwards we can exchange some information and use, people who are, returning into society, who have gone through some of the hurdles, and not necessarily all success stories, but still trying. And I think that's that's the overall theme, and what a lot of men and women coming from incarceration need to understand. It's not necessarily easy or seamless at this point. Is what we're working towards, but other people are, sort of going through the struggle, and there's some coping strategies that we can employ.
And I think you're in the right place as far as identifying critical partners who provide those additional supports for people coming out. Having been a person who myself years ago came through HRDI, through the criminal justice system, understanding the need to follow the rules, do it the right way, keep it as simple as possible to move forward. The person you see today was not the person when I was in HRDI. So I'd just like to thank you for bringing up that question. Next.
As I was listening to the new guidelines or direction of the Chicago Housing Authority, it caused me to think how many other, and also because of work that I do as just getting people more involved in civic engagement, began to make me think of how many opportunities or how many resources are out there for returning citizens that they don't know about. Like, I run into people every day when I'm registering, asking them to sign a petition or something. They'll say, well, I'm an ex-felon and I can't vote. And so I have to have that whole conversation and say, take the X off your back and put it on the ballot box. You can register and vote. And also, I'm looking at this, we have an expanding industry that's happening within our state in regards to the, first of all, the medical use of cannabis, and then the also upcoming legislation to legalize recreational cannabis. How can we redefine the selling areas so that it doesn't take it out of the communities, take it right out of the community, and the opportunity for the economic development is also being lifted outside of our community?
Okay, well, first of all, for the first part of the question, I think that as many direct service providers, and I think few people on the first panel had talked about it, we got to register to vote. We got to get engaged, we got to get involved. I do a weekly Policy 101 in our job readiness class, and out of the last 225 people who I've given Policy 101 to, only 6 have known who their state rep is. That's the starting point when they come into our door. We have to understand that policy works, and as we see here, effective policy and advocacy changes communities and creates opportunities. Now, as far as the marketing of cannabis dispensaries, I know, as you probably know, there are certain communities that's not going to happen in. So it's for, because this is personal, this is not safer's philosophy, because there's our president right there. But but we're not engaged. For change to happen, you have to be engaged, the voices have to be heard, the faces have to be seen. When that happens, things will change more quickly than here. This is a 7-year journey. Ban the box was a 7-year journey. I went down to Springfield, provided testimony in 2007. We got it passed. The governor vetoed it. One Northside, amazing work that Chris has done. CNC program. These guys are technically still in prison, doing machine operating training, coming out the door with $14, $16 an hour. And that's why I want this panel to be here, to show that effective policy and advocacy, voices, faces, can change opportunities. So that's what we need to do as far as in the communities most impacted by incarceration.
Hi, my name is Ina Silverglide. I'm an attorney that works with individuals who have criminal background issues. My question is, we know from statistics and studies that individuals who got college degrees while they were in prison were far less likely to come back to prison. We know that people who get skills that are employable, that there are actually jobs, they're not going to go back into prison. What's the likelihood that we can bring college education programs back into the prisons in Illinois, as well as programs such as CNC, putting them in the prisons so that people get out and they're going to be able to find a job, or they're going to be far less likely, to reoffend because they've got the skills and the education?
I can't speak for the Illinois Department of Corrections, even though I was there for 31 years. And I can't speak for the Safer Foundation, even though I've been here for, how many ever, 13 years or whatever. But I will speak to your question from a person who's been in the field of corrections for over 45 years. The pendulum swings back and forth. I've seen that pendulum swing back and forth probably 4, 5, maybe 6 times in the 40-some plus years that I've been in the system. When it's swinging over to the left, there's money, there's programs, there's activities, there's new initiatives, there's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. School programs are bulging in the prisons and the youth facilities, recreational activities, volunteers, treatment modalities. Everybody's out there trying to find the cure, big time, big money, big support. Community activities, but then all of a sudden the pendulum starts swinging back. And when it starts swinging back, all of those improvements, all of those activities start getting reduced because the pendulum has swung back. And when it swings back, we build supermax. When it swings back, we put guns and bulletproof vests on juvenile parole agents and adult parole agents. Good or bad, I'm not forming any opinions here, but the pendulum, I think the pendulum is starting to swing back the other way. I truly believe that. Because when the Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor says they want to have training programs in work release centers, that's a move back this way. When the Chicago Community Trust funded the CNC program, that's a switch coming back the other way. Educational programs seem to be on the rise in correctional facilities, that's a swing coming back. So I would say I think it's coming. Hang around, I think it's coming. But meanwhile, as Tony was saying, the voices have to be uniform out there. And maybe that flexibility in that pendulum swing won't be as deep when it swings. Maybe it'll just move a little bit. I see the state representative nodding her head, so I must be saying something that makes sense. So maybe that swing will be a little more narrow than huge like it's been for 4 decades that I know of.
We see the two people standing. Our president, Victor Dixon, is going to jump in for a minute. We'll get to your question.
You know, these are really excellent questions. It speaks to what Paula Wolff talked about. One of the things she mentioned was the economics and the reallocation of resources. And that's something that has to happen. If you think about our country, we fought wars, and we bombed Japan, and then we went and helped rebuild it. We bombed Europe and fought a war there, and then we had a Marshall Plan to rebuild it. We've had a war on drugs for all these decades now. Where's the Marshall Plan? It's devastated our communities, and we have generations of people to prove it. And the reinvestment, you know, so as we end these wars overseas and save these dollars, I mean, there's got to be a push from advocates to invest in our communities. And for people returning, that investment can start while they're in prison. There can be an investment there. And if we're going to bring prison populations down, we're going to have to be pushing for reinvestment of those dollars that are being spent in one area to shift over to the community and shift over to areas of reentry and housing and treatment and all of those kind of things. So there's an economic fight that has to take place. And so that's part of what I think our advocacy community has to engage in, is the economics. How do we shift the economics? Even things like, you know, the marijuana businesses. Well, you know, the question is, what are we going to do to invest in business and jobs in the communities where there's 50% unemployment? And there are some strategies that are being employed around the country that are actually getting to that. One of them is the anchor institution strategy that's being implemented in certain cities, where the hospitals and universities that are heavily government funded and supported are being asked to spend their money, the billions of dollars they spend, in the communities where those institutions are. And we have institutions like that in Chicago. put jobs and businesses right there and spend money in the community instead of sending it out of the state. So hopefully we will, we'll continue to fight legislative battles, but at some point they have to become economic battles, because that's what we're talking about. It's economic injustice. That's really what it is. That is the fight. So it's not about desegregation necessarily anymore. That was the 60s. Now it's economic discrimination, and we have to begin that fight.
Okay, last two, young lady right here.
And speaking of economic injustice, first of all, let me say thank you to Tony Lowry for inviting us out, and thank you for the wonderful job that you do for the Safer Foundation, and for recommending ex-offenders to the organization that I represent, which is the Higher Learning Network TV show. We're independent producers at CAN Television as well. And one of the things that we do is we teach youth behind the scenes radio, television, and print production, as well as it has a literacy component, which we also offer to ex-offenders. Now, this is the issue. Because they're ex-offenders, they don't want anybody to know, but they want to make some money because we teach them how to self-publish and how to, just like they sell socks and CDs on the corner, they can tell their story, put it in CD form or book form, and make money by doing that. My question is, who do you suggest that this organization go to for funding to help with the ex-offender publishing project, as well as partnerships? Who should we be partnershiping with? Because as independent producers, we can only do so much, and we need help. And I'm sorry, my name is Zelda Robinson-Hogues from the Higher Learning Network TV show. Don't everybody speak at once.
Well, I think you can probably look on the back of your program as far as organizations that financially support our policy and advocacy work. Chicago Community Trust, McCormick Tribune Foundation, Chicago Tribune Charities, McCormick Fund, as some opportunities as far as funding. Because when you're coming up with unique opportunities, you have to do the legwork and create those funding opportunities. So I would say that probably starting with Chicago Community Trust, and then if not, directing some opportunities, maybe Woods Fund of Chicago or organization that has funded our policy work over the years.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Last question from Milwaukee Workforce Development. No, I don't hear it.
I'm Gregory Williams with the Milwaukee Area Workforce Investment Board, and I'm going to say one thing real quick. I've been following the work of SAFER for years. I was #2 Wisconsin Correctional, and in 2001 I met Diane at one of the ICCA conferences in Boston when they actually came out with the Great Prison Study by Dr. Joan Peterson. I keep trying to tell our people that if we're going to do anything, because we're neighbors, we're running into a lot of the same issues that Chicago is dealing with. And respectfully, the best thing to do is look at models that exist. But I changed jobs 4 years ago. I'm with the Workforce Investment Board. And what we've been trying to do is concentrate on getting to the crux of the problems. People need jobs, but we have the highest incarceration rate in the country for minority males. With that being said, are there any efforts in mind to do more cooperation with interstate issues that we have? If you know too that our juvenile population, they're blaming a lot of the gangs to be from Chicago. Yeah. So is there anything in that realm to
I think our president wants to answer that question also. Okay.
Well, I appreciate your question, and I really am very pleased to tell you that one of the things that we just recently did, we applied for a federal grant called the Face Forward 2 intermediary grant, and that grant enables SAFER to act as a financial intermediary and provide technical assistance to other organizations, and it's for justice-involved youth, really focused at 17 to 23-year-olds. We actually issued an RFP, RFI, whatever. Yeah, RFP. And we sent it to Milwaukee, was one of the cities, St. Louis, Iowa, I think Davenport, Iowa, and here in Chicago. And we're in the process of awarding grants, and it's for this type of work that we do for youth, GED, mentoring, expungement, job readiness, job placement, all those kind of services. And we did that because we recognize that in our region, we do face similar issues in other cities. And it was part of our effort to say that we want to try and help other organizations really build their capacity to do the kind of things that SAFER does. I'm not really sure which organizations in Milwaukee responded. I think we did. Did we get responses in Milwaukee? I'm not sure exactly which agencies, but we're in the process of making decisions on awarding those grants, and it's a 3-year grant, and we should be out probably within a month or so with the decisions about who's going to receive the funds. So it's something that we want to do more of, and we are excited about this opportunity as our first step in that direction. Okay.
Okay, can we give our panel another great round of applause? And again, I'd just like to thank everyone for the continued support of the CARE Council, the Council of Advisors to Reduce Recidivism Through Employment. We know that employment is the most direct link to reduce recidivism. If people can get jobs, they can stay free. Again, thank you for attending the 13th Annual CARE Conference, and we will see you next year. God bless.